Hi there, my name is Zach Piero. I'm an assistant teaching professor of English and composition at Penn State Abington, and I want to share some of the ways that I use Google Docs in my writing courses. I'll be focusing this little presentation here on two goals in particular: how I use Google Docs to study architecture in the classroom, architecture with an X, like a text. So there we're looking at the way we're looking at writers' choices, decisions, the moves that they make in their text. If students are able to identify them in what they're reading, so my thinking goes, they'll be better positioned to be able to adopt or adapt those moves in their own writing. A second goal is for why I use Google Docs is because I think it's very valuable for facilitating feedback, both student to student feedback, along with instructor to student feedback. So I'll share a little bit of that. So listen, right now I want to kind of jump right in and show you how I came to this one particular activity. So in English 15, Rhetoric and Composition, our first year writing course at Penn State, I teach and assign op-eds, public arguments, for a lot of reasons. I think there's a lot of value to have students practice this genre in a first year writing course. And before they start writing one, we look at multiple examples of op-eds. And this one particular week, a couple years ago, this was published in the Philadelphia Inquirer. A writer named Mike Newell published a piece supporting supervised injection sites to help combat the effects of the opioid epidemic. And I found this piece and I liked it. And I was thinking to myself, like, instead of just having my class read it and then talk about it and then maybe pinpoint some moves, some language choices the writer was making in paragraph 4, line 3. I was like, I just wish there was a way we could all get in there together, maybe mark it up, maybe even manipulate some of the text, rewrite certain sentences or reorganize a paragraph or something like that. So I copied it. I was like, I wonder if I could import this essentially into a Google Doc. So I tried that and it worked. So here's a Google Doc, a blank one, and I just copied that op-ed you were looking at and I'm pasting it now. And the formatting isn't the best here, but it carries over, right? I'm going to jump ahead and show you a more polished up version of that. So here's a polished up version of that same op-ed that I just showed you. And like a lot of op-eds, this isn't too long. It's give or take 800 words or whatnot. And in class, we're jumping into the activity now. In class, at this point, students read it, and we're in a computer lab, so they have this up at their individual stations. And I believe we're working in like a small group kind of thing right now. And to help students get at this idea of a writer's moves, that writing is an endless series of choices, I started it out by, in this second line here, second paragraph here, Newell says he begins his sentence with, "for 2 years." So I highlighted this and I asked my class, like, what is this doing for this text? Why did Newell decide to include this little phrase here? He could have just as easily started off this sentence with "I've." So what's this little slice of language doing for him? Group members chat with each other, and then pretty soon this gets us to this idea of credibility and how he's using this to establish his credibility from the get-go. And we're more likely to pay attention and listen in and take his position a little bit more seriously. If, in fact, for 2 years, he's been probably doing a lot of thinking about this, researching it, whether it's library research or more like on the ground interview, empirical kind of stuff. So this like version A, version B stuff, where students can see two choices back to back, I think it can be really helpful for them to see how language choices impact people's experience of a text. So in a similar way, if we go down here to the 5th paragraph, Newell says, some of the rhetoric hurled at my inbox. So right here, I'll highlight the words hurled at. And I say that hurled is a very interesting verb action to use here. He didn't have to choose that. He could have chosen something else. In groups, I ask students, what could you replace this with? A word or 2 or 3 that would carry the same, more or less, the same information across, but might alter the tone. And students will be, working in groups, and I'll maybe call on one group 3, jump into the Google Doc, and then someone in group 3 will type sent to. Now we can compare this choice. What's the effect on readers of Newell using the phrase hurled at versus sent to? This helps us get at the connotation of language, how op-ed writers bring an evaluative stance to the subject material oftentimes. And so I think this is a really cool way to use Google Docs in a writing course. The way that writers use sources in digital contexts is a lot different than in print. Writers leave a trail of their sources, usually by just a hyperlink. So in this 4th paragraph, I doctored this text beforehand. I removed a source that Newell was using, where in the Philly Inquirer, they published a piece about a judge ruling that it was okay to use these supervised injection sites in Philadelphia. So I'll ask students, I'll say, if you wanted to support this claim a little bit more, what word or phrase would you hyperlink to? Would it be the word Wednesday? Would it be federal judge? Would it be a federal judge ruled Wednesday? Would it be the whole paragraph? I encourage them not to do that. So if you wanted to squeeze this out a little bit more and have everybody participating at the same time, let's say there were 5 groups in the class, you could have group number, and then like group 1, group 2, so on and so forth, 3, 4, 5. And then in this other column, you could have like the excerpt from the piece that we're excerpt. Did I spell that right? I think so. So I'm just going to copy and paste this over and over again and ask students, what would you hyperlink to? So the original version of this is here. At the end of the activity that day, usually I'll post to our Canvas homepage a more polished up version of what we practice. That way, because big Google Doc, a class-wide Google Doc can get a little bit gunky at the end of a class period, especially if you're running up against the clock, like I always feel like I am. But here's the original version, and here's the hyperlink to a piece that Newell hyperlinks to. So back to this activity, and everyone has access to this. I'll say, copy this, each group, and tell me where which phrase you might hyperlink to. And really, this isn't about correctness. This is about having reasons for doing what you're doing. And the value of this, I think, really is in the share out with the whole class about which word or phrase, or again, hopefully not the whole paragraph, students hyperlinked to and why. The value, I think, is in that why. But listen, you can really, there's any kind of textual feature, whether it's a topic sentence that you want to pinpoint, the presence of first person language. Usually that's something that first year students tend to be afraid of or resistant to, just because they've had that oftentimes drilled out of them in high school. Don't use I, don't use I. There's plenty of reasons for using I, and plenty of genres that privilege that convention. So you could use color coding patterns to tag all the instances of first person language, I, me, my, or even plural, our, we, so that students can get a feel for how I language, this first person language, isn't a one and done game. Oftentimes that writers usually distribute it somewhat evenly throughout their text. So the thinking goes, if we're studying other writers' moves or language choices so that we can make similar moves in our work, because students are reading this in part because they'll be writing op-eds. So we're trying to get a sense for what op-eds are and aren't. We can see here that, this distributing this first person language throughout the piece kind of gives it this cohesive feel. The writer's not using I in that first paragraph and then it drops off entirely, or the I doesn't first appear halfway through the essay, and which kind of has a jarring feeling usually for a reader. Who's this mysterious I? Kind of the place to sort of establish that oftentimes is from the get-go. So all this is to say, Google Docs, I think, can go a long way towards in-class activities in small groups where students are invited to color code certain textual features or qualities, to manipulate or mark up the text in some way. You might even do something like later on in the semester, if you were say working on a punctuation workshop or something, lower order concerns, commas, semicolons, dashes, parentheses, you could maybe ask students, okay, here's a sentence. Now I'd like you to bring some punctuation to it to heighten clarity for the readers. And you could make that similar table like I made earlier. You could do something like 2 by 6, we'll say, group number, I'll just say 1, 2, 3. And then here, each group could take some time working together to bring some punctuation to this. We'll say, okay, we see this little introductory clause at work here. Kind of the sentence starts in a lot of ways there. We see this almost like this rule of 3, though it's not a rule. Got our X, Y, and Z, or Oxford comma there. So experimenting with a text and almost putting the process back on a final product, I think can go a long way for pedagogical purposes and for teaching and learning of writing. If you'd like to read more about this, excuse me, in the 2016 edition of the journal Pedagogy, a composition and rhetoric researcher, Mike Bunn, he's got an interesting piece, Reimagining Workshop, where he does a similar thing. He asks, instead of asking students to look at just former students' work and, and improve it in some ways, he thinks like, okay, well, what if we do that to published work? And that sort of changes the power dynamic and gives our students more agency in a lot of ways. So that's one way. Another way that I use Google Docs is to facilitate feedback. And so in my English 420 class, Writing for the Web, I have a project where I ask students to participate in a blog, like a fan site almost. And students can choose which one, based on their interests. And I want them in part to publish an original article, original content on that blog. And this one student, I'm running up against the clock here, so it's going to be a little quick. One student chose all hip hop as her blog. And here is my feedback to her. Quick pause. Hi there, sorry for the interruption. A beautiful little toddler came running into the room. I had to hit pause real quick. Okay, so to wrap this up, using feedback, facilitating feedback is another reason why I like using Google Docs in my writing courses. Here's a student's blog post project, we can call it. And this is their second draft, I believe, name redacted. And I'm offering comments here. We can call these marginal comments on the margin. And this is useful for, I think, later drafts where the focus isn't exclusively on higher order concerns. And my whole purpose in giving feedback, typically in the form of questions, is so that students can use that feedback, think through it, and use that as a way to get their drafts up to the next level. And also to reflect upon some of those comments that they found valuable and why. So this is my feedback to a student. Student to student feedback looks like this. Similarly, just kind of what I'm doing. There's maybe 4 students in a group, all working on the same text here. And looks like my sharing is paused here. The long and short of it is Google Docs can be really effective for providing, drawing writers' attention to very specific moments in a text. As readers, we work our way through a text A to Z. Sometimes we've got those thoughts that come through our mind that at particular moments in time within a text. I think Google Docs and its insert comments feature is a good way for readers to pass along those like in situ thoughts that pass through our minds. Whereas for earlier drafts, like a first draft, Google Docs might not, and that insert comments feature might not be the best way to have students look at the text holistically and just focus in on global issues, higher order stuff, argumentation, their ideas, the organization and structure of the text, what kinds of sources are really working for the writer and which ones might not be, what kind of evidence they're using, that kind of thing. Okay, thank you for listening. I encourage you to experiment with Google Docs like anything. I think that the more we practice stuff, the better we get at it. So good luck, take care, and I'll see you around. Bye.